Hi again then guys, for the first ever episode from another Forza game in the franchise, and as I mentioned earlier on with the review from Project Gotham 4, this is something which I've always wanted to do on the channel, to branch out into some of my favourite racing games from years gone by. I plan to go into far more in the future, some which I can't record in the best possible ways at the moment, like Enthusia or Total Immersion Racing or some of the Tonne games, but for now we are still branching out into more, and over the course of this initial week we're going to be covering 9 different racing games at the same time. So this one is one of the new names for the channel. My first experience of playing the Forza franchise with Forza 2. I went from Gran Turismo 4 over to Forza 2 and immediately fell in love with it, because although Gran Turismo has stuff like the sheer numbers and the more detailed graphics and realism, Forza has more of a playfulness to it, but it's also far more realistic than most other, say, arcade alternatives. Now, with that being said, Forza 2 has a great selection of unicorn cars, and those are the vehicles in particular which I'm going to be featuring on from older Forza games, because when I review a car, I don't review the same car generally for every game that it's on. I generally review the newest game in its respective franchise that you can get it on. For instance, if it's on Forza 7, there's no need to go back to Forza 3 to take a look at it. Whereas for these ones, this one as a perfect example, this is a unicorn. It's not literally a unicorn car in the world of Forza, because Forza does have unicorn cars that you have to unlock and you can't buy. These are more unicorns in a general sense, cars which were featured on the game but never featured again. And there are some really cool ones, especially with the community. And next week we're going to be taking a look at probably the most popular one of all, as far as the community goes, from Forza 2. But for now, we're focusing on my favourite car from Forza 2 by far. It's not the fastest in the game, it's not the best in the game for sure, not even close, but it is a very good car in its own right, and it's one of my favourite supercar concepts, if you will, or prototype racers, kind of both. It's almost a supercar but not quite, almost a race car but not quite. In the real world it's different, but in the game of Forza 2 and the world of Forza 2, it is presented as being more of a road car than it is a race car, because although it looks like one, it has a full livery for instance, it's in the S category, not the R categories. That's very interesting, and potentially it's a big advantage for the car to have, because if you can get race-level downforce and grip and handling against street cars, well, that could really work to your benefit, of course. And in the case of this vehicle, the Seat Cupra GT, which is such a cool car, I think I can't say that enough, I really love this car, it's definitely the case. However, as much as I love it, it's not without its drawbacks. This car definitely has its drawbacks. Now, ironically, for a car that looks as good as this, one of the main drawbacks is power, funnily enough, because the car has 500 horsepower and 443 pound-feet of torque. That's not bad. In fact, that's really good. That's certainly good enough to be, if it were a production car, an excellent Seat supercar, or at the very least, super sports car. The downside, though, is that it's one of the only cars on Forza 2 that you cannot upgrade the power on. And although 500 horsepower in a vacuum, in effect, sounds like a good number, when you put it up against other S-level vehicles, it does struggle, on the straights in particular, because the handling on this thing is incredible. Among the best in the game, especially for the road classes, that's for sure. It's superb around corners. I would say pretty close to perfect, even, when you set it up correctly. It's a joy to work with. This was literally the first time I drove this on Forza 2 in years. And look at the way it's going around the track. No problems at all. It handles like an absolute dream. I immediately got back into the flow of the game with no problem, and that is partially due to how good this car is. It's basically a mini prototype in the body of a supercar. That's what I would describe the Cupra GT as. Now, as far as the rest of its specs, I mentioned that it is an S-Class vehicle, S975, so very high, but unfortunately you can't really get it much higher than that, because as I said, you can't improve the power, but you also can't really drop the weight that much, if at all. It's 1150 kilos, so basically GT car territory. Now, with that being said, the horsepower per tonne is decent enough, 435, and so that begs the question of when if at all, to use it, because this is a 250 grand car. That's a lot of money in the world of Forza 2. That's among the most expensive cars in the game, in fact, which is funny to think, looking back at that now, compared to how expensive cars have gotten in racing games. But I would say this is a car which is worth unlocking, because you do have to unlock it. Mainly, though, as a collector's piece. It is one of those cars that's fun to go back to the game just for the sake of driving. Vehicles which we all have feelings for, like that, from older games, like the Renault Espace F1 for me. It's got that nostalgic feeling from Gran Turismo 2, or various other cars from other games like this one. You can only get your fix of this car from Forza 2, so it gives you a good reason to go back. At least for me, anyway. I know that not many people do feel that strongly about this car. I personally love it. In terms of straight line performance, the top end speed is okay. You can't adjust the downforce, which doesn't really help, but you can adjust the gearing, thankfully, and you can get it up around, if memory serves, say 170, 180 without too much trouble. So, pretty good. Again, like a GT-style race car, that kind of territory. More a GT3 machine, borderline GT2. In terms of handling, it's spot on. The brakes are incredible, the grip is phenomenal, it's a pleasure to work with. Definitely very beginner friendly, but that's kind of irrelevant because you can't be a beginner and drive the car. And overall, it's a car which, as I said, most people aren't too bothered by, at least that I've heard. I don't hear people talking about this car that much, even people who have played the game. And at the same time, I can say that I find that disappointing, but I definitely also understand that. Not just because it's a Seat and who cares, but more so because of its drawbacks, and that lack of straight line power really does hurt the car. Now, with that being said, around Laguna Seca here in the S-Class, this was only 0.8 of a second slower than the McLaren F1 Longtail road car, also in the S category. That's not too shabby. That car doesn't weigh that much more. In fact, it may weigh less if memory serves, and the power is a lot more. So to be 0.8 behind a McLaren F1, that's not bad. Essentially, that is a road-going race car also, so it kind of shows the potential which the Seat has on a twisty circuit. I would just recommend avoiding tracks which have a lot of straight-line sections. If you do that, then you can have a lot of fun with it. But that's it overall for this initial review. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.